Jacob Reed had been living on Veridax 7 for almost 8 years now. The frozen planet was far from Earth, far from the war, and far from anyone who might ask him questions he didn't want to answer. He liked it that way. His compound sat on the edge of the northern wastes, a sturdy metal structure he'd built himself back when he still worked for the Colonial Engineering Corps. Now he just kept to himself, fixed things when they broke, and watched the ice storms roll across the empty plains. The morning the storm hit, Jacob was checking his fusion generator in the basement. The weather alert system started screaming at him around 10 o'clock. He climbed the ladder to ground level and looked at the scanner. The readings made his stomach drop. This wasn't just another winter storm. The temperature was dropping fast, already hitting -60 and still falling. Wind speeds were climbing past 200 kilometers per hour. This was the kind of storm that could kill you in under 3 minutes if you were caught outside. Jacob sealed all the outer hatches and reinforced the heating systems. He had plenty of supplies to wait it out. He'd been through bad storms before. This was just another one to survive. But then his motion sensors picked up something at the compound's eastern wall. At first he thought it was a malfunction. Nobody would be stupid enough to be outside in this weather. He checked the external cameras, wiping frost off the lens with the remote heater. Through the swirling white chaos he saw them. People. A whole group of them, pressed against his outer wall, trying to shield themselves from the wind. Jacob grabbed his cold suit and headed for the airlock. Every instinct told him this was dangerous. The war with the Valkyrie had ended only 6 months ago. Plenty of people on both sides still carried hate in their hearts. But he couldn't just leave people to freeze to death outside his door. That wasn't who he was. When he forced open the outer door against the screaming wind, he saw them clearly for the first time. 12 Valkyrie women, their purple-tinted skin already showing signs of frostbite, their thin emergency suits completely inadequate for Veridax weather. They looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. They knew he was human. He could see it in the way they pulled back even though they had nowhere to go. The tallest one stepped forward slightly, putting herself between Jacob and the others. She was older than the rest, maybe 50 in human years. Her face was hard, carved by grief and cold and probably 1,000 other things Jacob couldn't guess at. She looked ready to fight him even though she was half frozen and barely able to stand. Jacob didn't say anything at first. He just pulled off his thermal coat and handed it to the nearest woman, a younger one who was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. Then he started pulling emergency blankets from the storage locker by the door, passing them out to the group. "Inside," he shouted over the wind. "Now. Before we all freeze." The older woman didn't move. "You are human," she said in accented but clear standard. Her voice was sharp with suspicion. "And you're about 2 minutes from being dead," Jacob shot back. "Storm doesn't care who won the war. Get inside before you all die out here." For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind howled between them. Ice crystals stung Jacob's face. He could see the Valkyrie women exchanging glances, having some kind of silent conversation he couldn't follow. They were scared. Of course they were scared. Their people had been told for years that humans were monsters who tortured prisoners and showed no mercy to the weak. Finally, the older woman nodded once. "We go inside," she said. "But we stay together. All of us." "Fine with me," Jacob said. "Now move." He herded them through the airlock in 2 groups, sealing it behind them. Inside the compound's entrance chamber, they stood dripping melted ice onto his floor, still clustered together like cornered animals. Jacob could see them taking in every detail, marking exits, looking for weapons, preparing for whatever trap they thought he'd set. He was too tired for this. "Heat's down the hall," he said, pointing. "Got a big common room with a fusion heater. Go warm up. I need to seal the outer systems before we lose pressure." He turned his back on them and headed for the control panel. It was a risk, but if they wanted to kill him, they'd have plenty of chances later. Right now he had a compound to weatherproof. When he finished and walked to the common room 15 minutes later, he found all 12 of them pressed into the corner farthest from the door, wrapped in the emergency blankets, watching him like he might attack at any moment. Jacob sighed and walked to his supply cabinet. He pulled out his entire stock of thermal blankets, the good ones with battery heating elements, and carried them over. He set them down just out of reach and backed away. "Those are better," he said simply. "Trade you for the emergency ones when you're ready." Then he went to make coffee and figure out what the hell he was going to do with 12 Valkyrie war widows sheltering in his home. The first 3 days were the hardest. The Valkyrie women barely spoke to Jacob, and when they did, it was only in short, careful sentences. They stayed in the common room mostly, always keeping at least 2 of them awake at all times. Jacob understood. They were waiting for him to show his true colors, waiting for whatever horror they'd been taught to expect from humans. He just kept doing what needed doing. Every morning at 6 he checked the compound systems. Every evening at 8 he prepared the meal rations and left them in the common room. He didn't try to force conversation. He didn't ask questions about the war or their lost husbands or how they'd ended up freezing outside his compound in the first place. On the 4th day he noticed their cold weather suits were falling apart. The material was some kind of Valkyrie synthetic that wasn't meant for temperatures below -20. Veridax regularly hit -80. He found them trying to patch the suits with emergency tape, which was just about useless. Jacob went to his storage bay and pulled out his old engineering supplies. He spent the whole afternoon cutting and sealing proper thermal panels, adding heat strips along the seams, reinforcing the joints. When he brought the modified suits back, the oldest woman was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him. "Why do you do this?" she asked. Her name was something with clicks and whistles that Jacob couldn't pronounce, but she told him humans could call her Diana. She had gray streaks in her dark hair and scars on her hands that looked like burn marks. "Because if you go outside in those suits, you'll die," Jacob said, setting down the stack of repaired gear. "Seems pretty simple." "Nothing is simple between our people," Diana said coldly. Jacob shrugged. "Maybe. But the cold doesn't care about politics." She stared at him for a long moment, then took the suits without another word. By the end of the first week, Jacob realized his workshop would have to become their sleeping quarters. The common room wasn't big enough for 12 people to live in comfortably. He spent 2 days clearing out his equipment, setting up 12 folding beds he'd pulled from emergency storage, and installing privacy curtains. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and dry and better than sleeping on the floor. When he showed them the space, one of the younger women actually smiled. It was brief, just a flicker across her face, but it was there. Her name sounded like Clara in Standard. She looked barely 20 with wide eyes that had seen too much. "You give us your workspace?" she asked quietly. "I can work in the garage bay," Jacob said. "You need somewhere to sleep that isn't the floor." Diana stepped forward, her expression still hard and suspicious. "What do you want from us?" she demanded. "Humans do not give without taking. What is your price?" Jacob had been expecting this question. He met her eyes directly. "Help keeping the fusion core running," he said. "It needs monitoring every 6 hours. I can't do it alone anymore, not if I'm also maintaining the compound systems and keeping us all fed. And don't waste heat. That's it. That is all." Diana's voice dripped with disbelief. "That's all." She studied his face like she was trying to read a map written in a foreign language. "You are lying." "Nope," Jacob said. "Checks at 0600, noon, 1800, and midnight. I'll teach you how tomorrow. Now get some rest." He left before she could argue further. The teaching started the next morning. Jacob showed Diana and 2 others, Clara and a quiet woman named Rita, how to read the fusion core monitors, how to adjust the flow rates, how to recognize when something was about to go wrong. They learned fast, faster than he'd expected. Their fingers moved over the controls with confidence, and they asked smart questions about backup systems and emergency procedures. "Your military never taught you any of this?" Jacob asked during the second lesson. Diana's expression darkened. "Valkyrie military wives are not trained for survival. We are trained to maintain homes, raise children, honor our husbands' memories. When the war came to our colony, they gave us emergency suits and put us on evacuation shuttles. That is all." "That's stupid," Jacob said bluntly. Rita, who rarely spoke, actually laughed at that. It was a sharp, bitter sound. "Yes," she agreed. "It is very stupid." Over the following weeks, Jacob expanded the lessons. He taught them ice hunting, how to find the native crystalline formations that could be melted for extra water. He showed them how to repair pressure seals and patch hull breaches. He explained how to read Veridax's weather patterns, how to spot a killing storm building 3 days before it arrived. These were skills the Valkyrie military had never bothered giving to soldiers' wives. But they soaked up the knowledge like they were dying of thirst. Every evening after the lessons, Jacob would hear them in the workshop, practicing the procedures, quizzing each other, making sure everyone understood. Diana still watched him constantly. He'd turn around and find her eyes on him, measuring, calculating, waiting. She never relaxed, never let her guard down. The trap had to spring eventually, her expression seemed to say. Humans didn't show kindness without a reason. But days turned into weeks, and Jacob just kept teaching them how to survive. And the trap Diana kept waiting for never came. The evenings changed sometime around the 2nd month. It started small. One night, after the 1800 core check, Clara didn't immediately return to the workshop. She sat down near the heating unit in the common room, just sitting there quietly. Then Rita joined her. Then two more. Within a week, it had become a routine. After dinner, most of them would gather around the heater, not really doing anything, just existing in the same space. Jacob usually stayed in his own quarters during these times, giving them privacy. But one night Diana called out to him as he was leaving. "You can stay," she said. It wasn't exactly warm, but it wasn't hostile either. Just a statement of fact. So he stayed. For a while nobody talked. They just sat in the orange glow of the heating unit, listening to the wind howl outside. Then Rita spoke up. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the ambient noise of the life support systems. "My husband was a communications officer," she said. "He died in the orbital defense. I saw his ship break apart on the scanner. Just a bright flash, then nothing." The room went quiet. Jacob didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Another woman, Nyla, spoke next. "Mine was ground forces. The humans landed near our settlement. He went to fight them. Never came back. They never even found his body." One by one, over that evening and the ones that followed, the stories came out. Husbands lost to human railgun fire, to orbital strikes, to ground combat. Homes turned to ash by bombardments. Children separated in the chaos of evacuation, scattered across refugee camps on 3 different worlds. One woman, Vera, had lost her entire extended family when a human warship destroyed the transport they were fleeing on. Jacob listened to all of it. Every painful detail. Every loss. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend, didn't explain. He just listened, his face carefully neutral, his hands folded in his lap. Diana watched him through all of this, her eyes sharp and measuring. She still didn't trust him completely. Jacob could see it in the way she positioned herself, always between him and the younger women, always ready to move. On the 10th night of these gatherings, Diana finally spoke her own story. "My husband commanded a patrol ship," she said. "The humans ambushed his squadron near the asteroid belt. All 6 ships destroyed. No survivors. I was pregnant with our 3rd child when I received the notification." She paused, her jaw tight. "I lost the baby 2 weeks later. The stress," the doctors said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Jacob felt all their eyes on him. Waiting. This was the moment he realized. This was where he was supposed to show them who he really was. He took a slow breath. "I had a wife," he said quietly. "Laura. 2 daughters. Megan was 8. Amy was 5. The women went very still. "Colony raid, year 3 of the war," Jacob continued. "I was off-world working on a construction project. Valkyrie strike team hit the settlement. They were targeting the communications array, but the attack spread. 17 civilians killed. Laura tried to get the girls to the shelter." His voice stayed level, factual, like he was reading from a report. "She almost made it. 20 meters from the shelter entrance when the building came down. They found all 3 of them together. Laura was covering both girls with her body. Diana's entire body went rigid. The other women looked frozen, barely breathing. They were expecting rage now. Accusations. This was where the human would finally show his true nature, would blame them, would hurt them for what their people had done." Jacob looked up and met Diana's eyes directly. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "For your losses. All of them. For your husband. For your baby. For every damn thing this war took from all of us." Diana blinked. "Once. Twice." Like she was trying to process words that made no sense. "You do not hate us?" she whispered. "I hate the war," Jacob said. "I hate what it did. What it took. But you didn't kill my family. Some strike team commander I'll never meet made that call. Just like some human admiral I'll never meet made the call that killed your husband. Hating you for it would be like hating the ocean for a storm." The room stayed silent for a long time after that. 3 weeks later, Clara got sick. It started with a cough, then a fever that spiked to dangerous levels within hours. Jacob recognized it immediately. Frost fever. A local infection that Veridax's native microorganisms could cause. Humans could fight it off with the right antibiotics, but Valkyrie biology was different. Without treatment, she'd be dead in 2 days. The problem was simple. Jacob didn't have Valkyrie antibiotics. The nearest supply depot was 6 miles away, at an abandoned survey station. And outside, a whiteout storm was building, the kind that reduced visibility to 0 and could freeze exposed skin in under a minute. Diana grabbed his arm when she saw him suiting up. "You cannot go out in this," she said flatly. "It is suicide. She'll die without the medicine," Jacob said, checking his suit seals. So you die instead? This makes no sense. Jacob looked at Calera, who was barely conscious now, shivering despite 3 thermal blankets. Yeah, it does, he said. He walked out into the storm before Diana could stop him. The 6-mile trek 4 hours. Jacob followed his navigation beacon, but the wind kept knocking him off course. Twice he fell into ice crevasses and had to climb out with his emergency gear. The temperature hit -90. His suit's heating system was screaming warnings at him the entire way. He found the medicine in the survey station's emergency locker. On the way back he almost didn't make it. A wind gust knocked him down hard and he felt something crack in his ribs. He lay there in the ice for a full minute, trying to remember why he was doing this, trying to find the strength to stand up. Then he thought about Calera's face. About all 12 of them waiting back at the compound. About Megan and Amy who'd never gotten the chance to grow up. He stood up and kept walking. When he finally stumbled through the airlock 4 hours later, all 12 women were waiting. Diana grabbed the medicine from his frozen hands and ran to Calera. The others pulled Jacob's suit off and wrapped him in heated blankets, their hands quick and efficient, their faces tight with worry. You are insane, Rita told him, but her eyes were wet. Yeah, Jacob managed through chattering teeth. Probably. Calera recovered over the next 3 days. When she was finally strong enough to sit up, she found Jacob and just stared at him for a long moment. Then she said something in her own language, something musical and complicated that Jacob didn't understand. Diana translated quietly. She says you are not human. You are family. And something shifted in the compound after that. The women stopped watching Jacob like he was a threat. They started watching him like he was one of them. They stopped calling him the human, and started calling him Jacob. When he worked on repairs, they helped without being asked. When he cooked, they sat with him. When he made terrible jokes, they actually laughed. Diana still watched him sometimes, but her expression had changed. The suspicion was gone. In its place was something that might have been respect or trust, or maybe just the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes people could surprise you. The war had made them enemies. But somewhere in the long winter on Veridax 7, they'd become something else entirely. Spring came to Veridax 7 the way it always did, fast and without warning. Jacob woke up one morning and realized he couldn't hear the wind anymore. The constant howl that had been the soundtrack to their lives for 4 months had just stopped. He checked the external sensors and saw the temperature climbing. -20. -10. By noon it would hit 0, practically tropical by Veridax standards. The women noticed too. They gathered at the observation window, staring out at a landscape they hadn't seen in months. The ice field stretched endlessly under a pale blue sky, glittering in the weak sunlight. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. It is over, Rita said softly. The winter is over. Jacob nodded. He'd known this day would come eventually, but somehow he'd stopped thinking about it. The compound had started to feel normal. The routine of core checks and meal prep and evening gatherings around the heater had become his life. Their life. Diana was looking at him with an odd expression. The emergency beacon, she said. It will still be transmitting. Jacob had forgotten about that. On the first day while he'd been sealing the compound, one of the women had activated their distress beacon. Standard Valkyrie military protocol for lost personnel. He'd been too busy keeping everyone alive to think about what would happen when someone actually responded to it. Yeah, he said. I guess it will. The rescue ship arrived 3 days later. Jacob picked it up on long-range sensors, a Valkyrie military transport dropping out of slip space at the edge of the system. It would take them maybe 6 hours to reach Veridax 7. 6 hours before everything changed. He told the women at the evening gathering. They all went quiet, exchanging glances. Calera's hand went to her throat. Vera's eyes went wide. Nyla just stared at the floor. Diana stood up slowly. We should prepare, she said in that commanding voice she used when she was trying to hold herself together. Pack our belongings. Make ourselves presentable. But nobody moved. They all just sat there, looking at each other, at Jacob, at the walls of the compound that had kept them safe through the killing winter. Yeah, Jacob said finally. I'll get your suits ready. Make sure everything's sealed properly for the transfer. The next 6 hours felt strange. Everyone went through the motions of preparing to leave, but there was no energy to it. The women packed their few belongings in silence. Jacob checked and rechecked their suits, adding extra heat cells they wouldn't need but giving him something to do with his hands. When the transport finally landed a kilometer from the compound, Jacob watched it on the external cameras. It was a big ship, military grade, with weapons arrays that could level his entire compound in about 30 seconds. A personnel shuttle detached and started heading their way. I will speak to them first, Diana said. She changed into the cleanest version of her Valkyrie clothes, trying to look proper and composed. But Jacob could see her hands shaking slightly. You want me to stay inside? Jacob asked. She considered that. No, she said finally. They should see. They should understand what happened here. The Valkyrie captain who stepped out of the shuttle was tall and rigid, with a kind of military bearing that made Jacob's back straighten automatically. He had medals on his chest and scars on his face and eyes that had seen too much combat. 3 armed soldiers came out behind him, their weapons clearly visible. The captain's eyes swept over the compound, then locked onto Jacob. His hand went to his sidearm. Stand away from the prisoners, he ordered in sharp, accented standard. They're not prisoners, Jacob said calmly, not moving. They're survivors. There's a difference. Diana stepped forward before the situation could escalate. She spoke rapidly in Valkyrie, her voice formal and controlled. The captain listened, his expression shifting from suspicion to confusion to something that might have been disbelief. He switched back to standard, probably for Jacob's benefit. You claim this human sheltered you? Fed you? Made no demands. That is exactly what I claim, Diana said firmly. Because that is exactly what happened. The captain looked at the other women who'd gathered behind Diana. You are free to return home, he announced. The war is over. The treaties are signed. You will be transported to the resettlement camps and reunited with whatever family remains. The words hung in the air like smoke. Return home. Resettlement camps. Whatever family remains. Jacob saw the women's faces and understood what the captain wasn't saying. Home didn't exist anymore, not the way they remembered it. They'd be returning as widows of a lost war, women without status or purpose, to a world that had been bombed and burned and broken. The resettlement camps would be crowded and cold and full of people trying to rebuild from nothing. Diana looked back at the other women. Some long, silent conversation happened between them, the kind that didn't need words. Jacob saw Clara nod slightly. Rita's jaw set in determination. Vera reached out and squeezed Nyla's hand. Then Diana turned back to the captain. We stay, she said clearly. The captain blinked. I do not understand. We stay here, Diana repeated. On Veridax 7. With Jacob. One by one, all 12 women stepped forward and echoed her words. We stay. We stay. We stay. The captain looked genuinely stunned. His soldiers exchanged confused glances. You would choose to remain with a human? He demanded. After everything they have done to our people? After the war that killed your husbands? Diana's voice went very quiet, very firm. After everything he has done, she corrected. Yes. The captain stared at her like she'd grown a second head. This is madness. You are war widows. You belong with your own people. Our people put us on evacuation shuttles with inadequate supplies and no survival training, Rita said sharply. It was maybe the longest sentence Jacob had ever heard her speak. Our people left us to freeze. This human saved our lives. He taught us to survive, Clara added. He shared everything he had. He walked through a killing storm to get medicine when I was dying, Nyla said. Nearly died himself doing it. Vera stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. My entire family is gone. Everyone. The humans took them. But this human gave me a reason to keep living. You want me to leave that behind and go sit in some camp waiting to die? No. I stay. The captain looked at Jacob, his expression somewhere between anger and complete bafflement. What did you do to them? He demanded. Jacob met his eyes. Nothing. I just treated them like people. We are not prisoners here, Diana said. We are not servants or slaves or victims. We are residents. This is our home now. We choose to stay. The captain opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is highly irregular, he finally managed. File whatever report you need to file, Diana said. But we are not leaving. For a long moment, nobody moved. The soldiers looked uncomfortable. The captain looked lost. The women stood in a tight group, their shoulders back, their faces set with determination. Finally, the captain shook his head slowly. This will be in my report, he said. Command will want to know about this. They may send someone to investigate. They can investigate all they want, Diana said. The answer will be the same. The captain looked at Jacob one more time. You understand what you are doing? Harboring Valkyrie citizens on a human world? The complications this could cause. Jacob shrugged. I understand that 12 people need a place to live and I've got room. Everything else is just paperwork. The captain clearly didn't know what to do with that response. He stood there for another moment, then turned sharply and walked back to his shuttle. His soldiers followed, looking back over their shoulders at the strange scene. As the shuttle lifted off and headed back to the transport, Jacob turned to find all 12 women looking at him. "So," he said, "I guess you're staying?" Diana smiled. It was small and brief, but it was real. "I guess we are." Clara laughed, sudden and bright. Then Rita joined in. Then all of them were laughing, the sound echoing across the ice fields, full of relief and joy and the slightly hysterical edge of people who just made a choice that would change everything. Jacob found himself smiling too. "Well then," he said, "we'd better start building more rooms. This compound wasn't designed for 13 people long term." "We help," Diana said immediately. "You taught us engineering. We build together." And that, Jacob thought, watching the Valkyrie transport disappear into the pale sky, was exactly the point. The news spread faster than Jacob expected. Within a month the story was everywhere. 12 Valkyrie war widows choosing to stay with a human engineer on a frozen frontier world. In the bitter aftermath of a war that had killed millions on both sides, it was the kind of story people desperately needed to hear. The first journalist showed up 6 weeks after the Valkyrie captain left. A human woman from one of the core world networks, all polished and professional with recording drones floating around her head. She wanted the dramatic story, the emotional reunion, the tale of enemies becoming friends. Jacob hated every minute of the interview. "So why did you do it?" she asked, her voice dripping with that sympathetic tone journalists used when they wanted you to cry on camera. "Why risk everything to shelter enemy combatants?" Jacob was elbow deep in a water filtration system at the time. He didn't even look up. They weren't combatants. They were refugees. And they needed help. "But after what the Valkyrie did to your family?" "These women didn't do anything to my family," Jacob said flatly. "They lost people too. We all lost people. That's what wars do." The journalist pushed harder. "But wasn't there anger? Resentment? Fear?" Jacob finally stopped working and looked at her directly. "Yeah, there was fear. On both sides. But fear and cold don't mix well. Someone had to make a choice. I chose to open the door." Didn't seem complicated. The interview aired across human space 3 days later. Jacob didn't watch it, but Diana did. She told him later that he'd looked angry and tired and completely uninterested in being a hero. "Good," Jacob said. "Because I'm not one." But the story took on a life of its own anyway. Within weeks, more journalists arrived. Then researchers. Then politicians wanting to use the compound as proof that peace was possible. Jacob turned most of them away at the door, but some got through because Diana thought it was important. "People need symbols," she told him one evening. "They need to believe the hate can end." "I'm not a symbol," Jacob muttered. "I'm an engineer who didn't want people freezing to death on his doorstep." "You are both," Diana said simply. "Whether you like it or not." The real change started about 4 months after the spring thaw. A group of Valkyrie refugees arrived on a transport, asking if the stories were true. Could they really settle here? Could humans and Valkyrie actually live together peacefully? Jacob looked at the 27 scared, exhausted faces and sighed. "You willing to work?" he asked. They nodded eagerly. "You willing to learn engineering and pull your weight maintaining systems?" More nodding. "Fine. We'll need to expand the compound. Who knows construction?" That was how it started. The 27 became 50. Then 80. Then more than 100. Humans started arriving too, mostly veterans who couldn't go home, who carried too much trauma from the war to fit back into normal society. People who needed a place where the past mattered less than what you could contribute. Jacob's small compound transformed into an actual settlement. They built new structures, installed bigger fusion cores, set up hydroponic farms and underground caverns. Diana proved to be a natural administrator, organizing work crews and managing resources. Rita became the settlement's chief engineer, her quiet competence earning respect from everyone. Clara started teaching the Valkyrie language to human settlers and standard to Valkyrie refugees. Jacob kept building. It was what he did best. He designed the structures, taught people how to maintain them, and expected everyone to carry their share of the load. He treated everyone exactly the same, whether they were human or Valkyrie, veteran or refugee, young or old. You worked, you learned, you helped your neighbors. That was the deal. One evening, about 8 months after the settlement really started growing, a young human man asked Jacob why he never talked about the war. "Don't you hate them?" the kid asked, gesturing at the Valkyrie families living in the nearby buildings. After what they took from you? Jacob was quiet for a long moment. I hate what war does to people, he said finally. But these folks here? They're not the war. They're just people trying to survive, same as me, same as you. You want to carry hate around, that's your choice. But hate's heavy. Gets tiring after a while. The kid thought about that. So you just let it go? Didn't say that, Jacob replied. I said I don't hate the people here. The anger's still there. Probably always will be. But I get to choose what I do with it. I choose to build something instead of burning everything down. Some days that's harder than others. But it's still my choice. Word of the settlement spread through both human and Valkyrie space. Some people called it a miracle. Others called it naive. A few called it treason. Jacob ignored all of it and kept building. A year after the 12 widows had arrived, Diana found him working on the newest residential structure. She'd brought something with her, a piece of metal carved with Valkyrie script. What's that? Jacob asked. A proverb, Diana said. Very old. It says, the strongest walls are built from choices, not stone. She'd had it made in both Valkyrie and standard script. She wanted to mount it above the main entrance to the original compound, the door where she and the others had first stumbled inside, half frozen and terrified. Jacob looked at the carved words for a long moment. You sure? Seems kind of sentimental. Diana smiled. It is sentimental. It is also true. They mounted it together that evening, all 12 of the original widows gathering to watch. When it was done, they stood back and looked at what they'd built. The compound had grown into a real town now, with 200 permanent residents and more arriving every month. Humans and Valkyrie living side by side, working together, building something new from the ashes of the war. You know what the remarkable thing is? Rita said quietly. We are not special. None of us. We are just ordinary people making ordinary choices. That's exactly what makes it remarkable, Vera added. If we can do this, anyone can. Jacob didn't say anything. He just looked at the settlement, at the lights in the windows, at the people moving between buildings, humans and Valkyrie mixing naturally now like it was the most normal thing in the world. Maybe it was. Maybe that was the whole point. The journalists kept coming back, always asking the same questions in different ways. Why did you help them? What made you different? How did you overcome the hate? Jacob's answer never changed. They needed help. I could give it. That's the whole story. But Diana, who'd become the settlement's unofficial spokeswoman, always added more. She talked about how one man's refusal to give in to hate had saved 12 lives. How those 12 had become a community. How that community had become proof that the war didn't have to define them forever. Jacob showed us something our worlds had forgotten, she told one particularly persistent reporter. That compassion isn't weakness. That helping someone who's supposed to be your enemy doesn't make you a traitor. It makes you human. The reporter jumped on that. So you're saying humans are better than? No, Diana interrupted sharply. I am saying compassion is what we should all be. Human, Valkyrie, whoever. The war made us forget that. Jacob reminded us. That is his gift. 2 years after that first terrible winter, the settlement had a name, Reed's Landing. Jacob hated it, but he'd been outvoted by literally everyone else who lived there. It had permanent structures now, a working economy, schools for the children, and a reputation across both human and Valkyrie space as the place where the future was being built. Jacob still lived in the original compound. So did the 12 widows who'd started everything. They'd become the settlement's informal council, though Jacob refused any official title. He was just the guy who kept the systems running and taught engineering to anyone willing to learn. On the second anniversary of that first winter, they gathered around the heating unit like they used to, all 13 of them. The compound was quieter now with so many other places to live, but this space still felt like home. Do you ever regret it? Nyla asked Jacob. Opening that door? Jacob thought about it. Thought about how his simple, quiet life had turned into this chaotic, noisy community full of people who needed things from him constantly. Thought about how he could never just be alone anymore, how there was always someone asking for help or advice or just wanting to talk. No, he said finally. I don't regret it. Why not? Clara asked, genuinely curious. Jacob looked around at their faces. 12 women who'd been strangers and enemies who were now family. Because you needed help, he said simply. And I could give it. Everything else that happened? That's just what comes from making the right choice. Diana smiled. The human way, she said. No, Jacob corrected gently. Just the right way. The rest of you proved that. You made the same choice when others started arriving. Help them. Teach them. Build something together. That's not human or Valkyrie. That's just what decent people do. Outside, the settlement of Reed's Landing continued its evening routine. Lights flickered on in windows. People walked between buildings, calling greetings in both languages. Children played in the streets, human and Valkyrie mixed together so completely you couldn't tell where one group ended and another began. The 12 war widows had never left. And because they stayed, hundreds more had found their way here. Found a place where the war was history, not destiny. Where what you built mattered more than what you'd lost. Jacob Reed had opened a door during a winter storm. That single choice had changed everything. Not because he was special or heroic or anything other than a tired man who couldn't let people freeze to death. But because when faced with a choice between hate and help, between fear and compassion, between the easy path and the right one, he'd chosen to be decent. And decent, it turned out, was revolutionary.